So in episode 3 of this series, we're going to be coding this remove depth of field button. In the last episode, we made the add depth of field chunk of code, and today we're going to be removing that, since it's not very convenient to always be selecting the empty here and disabling all of the effects. We're just going to make this into a nice clean chunk of code that will eventually add into a button like this. So make a new text file, import bpy. Let's begin. So the first step we want to do is to select the camera, because when removing it, we want to select all the values and return them to the default ones. So no depth of field, no focus object, and the default aperture. So in order to get to these camera properties, we're going to select the camera as the active object. Now we did that in the last episode actually. This is how we select it and make it the active object, so we're just going to copy that over. Whoops, I do not want to make a new text file. Paste that in there, and so this is going to select the camera. Then we're going to select everything, or set all the camera properties back to their default values. So if we were to deselect the checkbox, setting it to false, we're going to copy that over. So that's turning off depth of field, focus object. If we were to get rid of it, you can see that it's just run a line of code which is setting the focus object to none. So that's the other line of code we want to run. And I know that the default aperture value is 2.8 for the f-stop, so I'm just going to make that 2.8, let Blender run the code, and copy it in. So there you have it. That's setting all the camera properties back to their default values. If we were to run this, you can see that this has all been enabled. No more focus object, default f-stop. So yeah, that's how we do it. Now the other process of removing the depth of field is to delete this empty object. So the way to delete objects in Blender is a little bit complicated. It's more complicated than just selecting this empty and pressing delete. As you can see, it does work, but the problem with this is that this could be for multiple objects. So if we accidentally have the camera selected and then we select the empty object, this could delete both the camera and the empty at the same time, and we don't want that. So we're going to do a few more lines of code than simply copying and pasting this line here. We're going to need to use a couple variables. So the first thing we want to do is set a variable to be the empty. So obj works fine, object equals, and then we're going to select the path for the empty object. So we're going to type out bpy dot context dot scene dot objects, and then in square brackets the name of the object. So for me, camera focus, and close brackets. So this is basically setting the variable of the object to the camera focus object. So now instead of having to type out this long bpy.context.scene.objects camera focus, we can just refer to it as obj. So now we need to deselect everything, and this is to prevent multiple objects from getting deleted accidentally. So our line of code to delete or to deselect everything is as follows: bpy dot ops, and ops means operations, so you might see this come up again for different operations that we use. bpy.ops.object.selectAll underscore all, and in parentheses we're going to put action equals, in quotation marks, all caps, deselect. This is basically, instead of selecting all, it is selecting all, but then deselecting them all. So it's a kind of a roundabout way to do things, but it's simplest. Now we're going to set our empty back to be the active object so we can delete it. So we know to make the empty the active object, we need to copy this line of code, sets the active object down here. And instead of having to type out our bpy.context.scene.objects camera focus, we can simply just refer back to the variable that we created, obj, since this is essentially the empty itself. So now that the empty is set to be the active object, we can type out obj.select underscore set, and this is going to be true. And don't worry about this. It's just making sure if there's any extra objects within the empty, or if it's selected, or if it's parented to anything, then it's going to select that whole set. And then we just need to run our delete function, which we did, but I'm just going to type it out. bpy.ops.object.delete, and then in parentheses use underscore global equals false. And this chunk of code is how we will delete the object. And just looking through, making sure all the spelling is correct, because chances are if it throws an error message, it's because I misspelled something, but everything looks fine. So I'm just going to quickly add the depth of field like this with our quick and easy button. And now what I can do is just run this code, and it's going to get rid of everything. It sets the camera parameters to the default values and deletes the empty. So that is essentially all that the remove depth of field button does. And the last thing we want to do is, with this chunk of code, which is setting the camera parameters to their default values, we want to put that at the start of our add depth of field button. So how we can do that is just copy this chunk of code, and we can go over to our add chunk of code, and above everything we just want to do this, and we should also set the camera to the active object as well. And the reason I like to do this is it just gives a fresh start for the add depth of field button. You probably don't need to do it. I just like to do it because it gives the chunk of code a fresh start and avoids any like weird bugs or anything from popping up if everything's back to the default value. And there we go. We have a fully functional add depth of field button, which you can see here, and we have a fully functional remove depth of field button. And it's not nicely integrated like this yet. We still have to manually run the code. But yeah, it works. The last thing we want to do is save both of these files, since, you know, don't want to lose our work. And you can rename it anything you want within Blender, but to actually save it onto your desktop, you need to go into text and save as. And I would recommend saving it as a .py file, just to nicely upload it. So add.py, just save it, and it's going to save it onto your desktop. You can rename it within Blender as well. Text002, this is our remove function, so remove, and save it onto our desktop, remove.py. There we go. It's saved, and in the next episode we can work on the update depth of field button, as well as starting, or actually we can probably fit in the whole integrating these lines of code into a drop-down menu. It might be a longer episode, but we will get through it. So thanks for watching, and yeah, see you in the next episode.